First book I'll be reading, The Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko, Willink, and Leif, Babin. So I read the preface, and it talks about how this book adds on to his other book, his first book, Extreme Ownership. And I've read that, and it's probably been a year or two since I've read it. But I mean, it just talks about how you look at every situation and how what could you have done differently to try to change the outcome. You place all the responsibility on your shoulders, and you kind of ask yourself, okay, what could I have done differently to get a different result? Instead of saying like, oh, that person did this, or that person did that. It all comes back to what could I have done. And I think it's good to think that way, because if I would have taught that person better, if I would have showed that person better on how to do this, or relating it back to, say, landscaping, if I would have shown that person how to run this machine or do this better, well, then maybe something, maybe that would have happened different, or yada, yada, yada. And you can look at it in everything. Relationships. If I would have did this differently, maybe that person would have acted differently, or whatever it may be. But it all comes back to me and how I reacted to the situation, what I did in the situation to get the results I got. And again, it's been a few years since I've read that book, but my memory serves correct. That's the majority of it. So, part one, introduction. So it's not part one, it's the introduction. Finding the balance. And it gives a little background, talking about, them in war. But it talks about the most important thing I got out of it was you need to train everyone around you to be a leader. And then you need to learn how to let them lead, but know your position. And when you're the leader and you're giving those people, the opportunity to lead and everything else, like, you still need to take responsibility. Let's say they make a mistake. Well, you as the leader need to say, okay, what could I have done differently to teach him so he doesn't make that mistake again? And so that's the most important thing I got out of the introduction, was teaching others to learn how to lead. That way, if you have a group of leaders, you'll be a lot more efficient, and even when you do have the problems, or obstacles, it'll be much easier to get over them. Where if you only have one person that can lead and knows how to lead, then everything goes back to that one person. So that's kind of what I got out of it. Part one, balancing people. Chapter 1, the ultimate dichotomy. In this chapter, it reads, the hardest and most painful of all the dichotomies of leadership, to care about your men more than anything in the world, so much so that you'd even willing to trade your life for theirs, and yet, at the same time, to lead those men on missions that could result in their deaths. I showed in an earlier video why I chose this book and why I like reading books from people in the military. And in this first chapter, it's already showing that, on how when these Navy SEALs are leading, that death is going to happen. When they were in Iraq, Afghanistan, death was going to happen, and they knew that. And to me, that's why I like reading them, is because these leaders know that they need to lead to the best of their abilities, because death can be the result. You know, when they care about their teams so much and knowing, you know, that death can happen, to me, these leaders are some of the best leaders in the whole world, because the risk, you know, what they're doing is at the highest level. So that's why I've chose this book, and already in chapter 1, it's talking about some of the team members that they lost, and, you know, how important it is to be a good leader in their role. That being said, you know, for them, they can be the best leader ever to live. Death is still a possibility. They could do everything right, but it only takes one bullet, or, you know, one lucky shot, or, you know, it only takes one. And so even if it's best leader out there, you do everything right, they're still going to make mistakes. It talks about how, you know, they had the best plan in place, but still, you don't know the outcome when you're going, you know, when you follow through. And when you look back at it, you're like, oh, I could have done this different, this different, this different. But in reality, you had a good plan, you had the best plan in place, you had a reason for that plan, but still your outcome, you didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And, you know, that goes with anything in life. Mike Tyson said, you know, and I'm not exactly sure the quote, but everyone has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. It's the same kind of thing, you know. You have the best plan, but you don't know the outcome. And how do you react in those situations? So at the end of chapter 1, it talks about so it talks about how you have to care about your people tremendously, but you also have to realize the overall mission and goal that you want to accomplish. And sometimes you have to let people go and do things that you're not necessarily going to like, but it's a necessity, because in this case, it was talking about how he had too many people employed, and if he didn't cut some of them off, then the bigger mission would be compromised. And then, you know, who knows what that could roll into in effect. You know, he wanted to save all of his employees, but then they were losing money, and, you know, they weren't being successful, aren't completing the mission. And if he didn't make the changes, well, then that could lead to the whole company going down, and then it wouldn't be just the, you know, 100 employees or whatever it may have been. It would be 600. You know, sometimes you got to make those sacrifices and cut some of those people off that aren't contributing to the big picture, to make sure that the big picture gets done.